in my opinion, no Doom list of any sort would be complete without some sort of My Dying Bride album on there. And this one right here, obviously, was the first one that I had heard. That's kind of what this thing is all about. But I still also kind of like this album the most. It's from 2004. If you ask me, that was a really interesting period in My Dying Bride's career. I think it's they made some of their most atmospheric stuff, um, heavy but still very introspective. Not as death metally as the very very early stuff, but still heavy. But the songwriting here was just top notch. I think this album and the one before it may be the best songwriting of their career, and that's saying a lot. I like a lot of My Dying Bride albums. In fact, they don't have anything I don't like. But this right here, for me, this is top of the heap. This is in my opinion probably their best album. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I always consider this a Doom Death album. I think that's the general consensus, but I'm not really sure. If I remember correctly, this is the only kind of Doom album of any sort that Amorphous ever did. Obviously, the stuff before this was, just pure death metal, pure finished death metal, and then everything after it was just kind of different variations of their brand of progressive metal. But this was the album where you started to hear the progressive elements. You can hear it in the riffs. Some of the riffs you can totally hear stuff that they would do like 10, 15 years later, which is kind of cool. But there's some magic sprinkled on top of this album that I feel like they never quite were able to replicate, and that's okay because they've done well for themselves. They made some cool music. I think this album is probably taking some influence from Paradise Lost Gothic, but I can't say that for sure. That's kind of what I hear. But again, it's still got plenty of its own originality, its own it's got its own finished death metal flavors are still kind of simmering in there. With all kinds of other new elements that were very exciting. I remember when I first heard this, I was just blown away because to me again it sounds like a Doom Death album, but it's just so unique. It's got a little bit of like just touches of 70s prog with the organ and stuff. This is a really special album for me, and I really don't think anyone else has ever made an album quite like it. So it was about 2003, and I still hadn't heard Cathedral. I knew the name. They were a band they were on my radar. They were a band I really wanted to discover. And I was actually taking a trip down south, and I was in Mobile, Alabama, of all places. And I found this store that actually it was like a media store. They sold DVDs and CDs. And I went in, and they had a decent metal section. It was not huge, it was like one or two aisles, but in those two aisles, there was a decent amount of undergroundish, metal packed in there. And while I was down there, about as much as I could afford, while I was supposed to be spending my money on other things. Yeah, among the CDs that I bought there, I bought this one right here, the Seventh Coming by Cathedral. I really love this album. I don't think it's quite as good as the album that would follow it, but it's still really really good. Since then I've heard almost all of Cathedral's stuff. I have a good chunk of it in my collection, but this one is very strong, especially for being geez, what, 15 years or more into their career. I think this is a damn good album, all things considered, whatever, however you want to say it. Great album, Cathedral. Love them. I don't really remember the story of how I stumbled upon this album, but this was the first album of theirs that I had heard. And I think it was around the time when it was new, so I guess it wasn't really that long ago when you think about it. 2007. Shit, 15 years ago. Okay. Anyways, I love Electric Wizard. I really do. I like their early stuff. I like their most of their later stuff. But for me, Witch Cult Today, this one right here is just fucking magical. Everything about it, the atmosphere, the riffs, the songwriting, even the vocals. I really like Jess Osborne's vocals here. Uh, I don't know. There's just something about this album. I know everyone will go for the earlier stuff before they go for this one, typically. But for me, this is when I want to hear Electric Wizard 9 times out of 10, I reach for this one. This is just for me an absolute doom masterpiece.
It's hard to believe, but no proof is needed of the cruelty.
I got into the Obsessed probably 2003 or 2004, and this, you guessed it, this was the album that I picked up first. And while I didn't really like seek out their whole catalog like I do with some bands, and like a lot of people probably did with the Obsessed, I really like this one. I only have this, and then I have a compilation, I think, of some earlier stuff, something like that. So the Obsessed was Scott Wino, or Scott Weinrich. His band pre Saint Vitus, another cool band that I wish I could include in this series, but I really got into them pretty late. He started the Obsess in 1980, and he wouldn't join the Saint Vitus, I think, until '86. So this was I don't know if this was his first band. This is probably his first band that got recognition or made it, got signed to like a decent sized record label. This album right here, I think made it to a major label. I could be wrong. I don't know. I'm not here to talk about stuff like that. But bands like The Obsessed and Saint Vitus and I don't know. There's probably a few others you could throw in there. Really kind of a cool scene. It just seemed like these dudes who were born, 10 years too late, and they just kind of seemed like dudes out of time. You know what I mean? Like they just didn't seem like they belonged in in the time period that they were born in. And I always really thought that was kind of cool. Uh, they just look like kind of hard rocking. I don't want to call them hippies, but they just look like dudes that march to the beat of their own drum, and I always appreciated that. Anyways, yeah, like I said, I really wish I could include some Saint Vitus, but it just wouldn't be right since I didn't get into them until at least a handful of years after pretty much all these bands. So, yeah, I have heard people say that this Obsessed album is certainly not the best, that it's, maybe one of the weaker albums, but I just really like it. And like I said, I got into it at still a impressionable age, and it's always stuck with me. So, what do you guys think about this one? Is it their worst album, or what do you think? Let me know.